There is a way the old masters learned, not by rushing, not by chasing, but by becoming. In a quiet dojo at the edge of Kyoto, a young man once knelt before his teacher, frustrated, trembling, and desperate to improve. His blade was sharp, but his spirit scattered. "Sensei," he whispered, "why do I not learn faster?" The old master smiled. "Because you keep trying to learn what you have not yet become." What followed was not a lecture, but a transformation. Through 3 silent stages, Shu, Ha, and Ri, the young man would discover that mastery was never about knowledge. It was about surrender, about presence, about dying to the ego that demands speed, and awakening the patience that births true understanding. This is the ancient Japanese method that makes you learn anything 10 times faster, not through haste, but through harmony. Because in the dojo of life, the fastest way forward is stillness. Chapter 1 None. The student and the sword. At the edge of Kyoto, where the morning mist kisses the stone path, a young man kneels before his master. His name is Ryo, a student of the sword, eager, fierce, restless. Each dawn, he trains until his palms bleed. Each night, he collapses beneath the weight of his own ambition. He believes mastery is a race. That skill can be hunted, conquered, achieved through sheer will. But the more he pushes, the slower he becomes. His blade cuts the air, sharp but hollow, precise but lifeless. The master watches in silence, a man of few words, his eyes like still water, reflecting everything, revealing nothing. Days turn to weeks. The student grows frustrated. Anger replaces patience. Doubt replaces faith. "Sensei," he says one morning, "why do I not improve? I train harder than anyone. I give everything." The master's voice is quiet, but it lands heavy, like a stone on calm water. "Because you keep trying to learn what you have not yet become." Ryo blinks. The words pierce deeper than any blade, but he does not yet understand. That night, as the rain whispers against the roof, the master walks to the center of the floor. He draws his sword, not to strike, but to show. Every movement is slow, effortless, fluid. The blade hums like a living thing. Ryo watches, mesmerized. There is no tension, no rush, no thought, only presence, only being. The master sheathes his sword. He looks at Ryo and says, "The sword is not fast because it wishes to be. It is fast because it no longer hesitates." Silence. Only the sound of rain. Ryo lies awake that night, staring at the ceiling beams of the dojo. His mind races. He remembers every failure, every strike that missed perfection. He feels the weight of his expectations pressing down on his chest. In the stillness, he begins to see the truth. His greatest enemy has never been the sword. It has always been himself. His fear of being ordinary, his hunger for approval, his obsession with speed. They've made his movements frantic, his learning shallow. The harder he tries to grasp mastery, the more it slips through his fingers, like trying to clutch water with a closed fist. The next morning, Ryo arrives early, before the other students, before the sun. He kneels, waiting for his sensei. When the old man arrives, Ryo bows deeply. "Sensei," he says, "teach me how to learn, not how to fight." The master smiles faintly. That was the first moment Ryo truly listened. From that day, training changes. The master gives no new techniques, only stillness. He commands Ryo to practice a single strike, one motion, repeated 1,000 times. No variation, no flourish, no speed. Days become a blur of repetition. Rio's body aches. His mind rebels. Every swing feels meaningless. He begins to question, to doubt again. What is the point of this? The master says nothing. Then, one afternoon, something shifts. Rio's breathing aligns with the rhythm of the swing. His thoughts fade. Time slows. He no longer thinks about the movement. He becomes the movement. For a brief moment, he feels peace. No comparison, no frustration, only silence. And in that silence, he feels faster than ever before. That evening, the master approaches quietly. He sees the change, the soft focus in Rio's eyes. He nods. Now you begin to understand, he says. The sword is only a reflection. What you sharpen is not steel. It is spirit, Rio bows. For the first time, gratitude replaces pride. The next days pass differently. Rio trains not for mastery, but for presence. Each strike is a meditation. Each breath, a reminder that progress cannot be forced. Science would later call this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through repetition and focus. But the ancients already knew. They just called it discipline. The nervous system calms. The body synchronizes. The line between effort and awareness blurs. When we stop rushing, our brain learns faster because learning thrives in calm, not chaos. The master understood this. The ancients always did. Weeks later, as dusk paints the mountains gold, Rio feels a strange stillness in his movements. The blade no longer drags. His muscles no longer fight against him. Every swing feels lighter, more honest. He finally sees speed is not a function of muscle, but of clarity. The clearer the mind, the faster the learning. He bows deeply to his master that evening. Sensei, he says softly, I think I understand. The master smiles. Do not think, he says. Just continue. The camera pulls back. A wide shot of Rio alone, his silhouette framed against the fading light. His sword rises and falls, again and again. Steady, calm, intentional. The master watches from the shadows, murmuring. He begins the path of Shu, though he does not yet know its name. And so begins the next stage. The breaking of form. Chapter 2. Shu, the discipline of obedience. Rio woke before the dawn. The mountains were still wrapped in blue mist, and the dojo floor was cold beneath his knees. Today, the training would begin again, but this time, it would not be about speed or strength. The master had given him one order. Repeat. One motion, one strike, again, and again and again. At first, Rio felt insulted. He had been training for years. Why return to the simplicity of a beginner? But the master's silence left no room for argument. So he obeyed. Hour after hour, he swung the blade. The same arc, the same breath, the same controlled exhale. His arms burned, his back stiffened, his mind screamed for variety. And yet, he continued, because obedience was the only language the dojo spoke. Days blurred together. He began to lose sense of time. There was only rhythm. The whisper of steel through air, the dull thud of his feet on the wooden floor. At first, it felt meaningless, but slowly, something inside him began to shift. The body started remembering what the mind kept forgetting. His hands adjusted without command. His breath synced with movement. He was no longer doing the technique. The technique was doing him. This was the first truth of Shu, to protect the form until the form protects you. Rio realized that imitation was not weakness. It was humility. To learn from the old masters was not to copy them, but to inherit their rhythm, to borrow their spirit until it became his own. Every repetition carved something unseen, not muscle, but mind, not skill, but stillness. The master finally spoke after many silent days. "Do not chase perfection," he said softly. "Let repetition erase you. Only then will you become pure enough to learn." Rio bowed. He did not yet understand the depth of those words, but they stayed with him, like the echo of a bell in an empty valley. Over the following months, the dojo became his world. The outside faded, the city noise, the distractions, the hunger for praise. His universe shrank to one sound, the blade meeting the breath. In this repetition, Rio began to see patterns in everything. The rise and fall of his thoughts, the ebb and flow of his emotions. He noticed that impatience came in waves, that boredom was just another mask for fear. And when he stopped resisting them, they passed, like clouds over a still pond. He learned that discipline is not about control, it is about trust. Trust that every dull repetition is a step toward awakening. Trust that the unseen progress is still progress. Science would call this the formation of muscle memory, but the ancients had another name for it: spirit in motion. Neuroscientists now know that when you repeat one skill with mindfulness, your neurons fire together, wire together, and form bridges that make learning effortless. But centuries before the term existed, the masters already understood it through experience. They knew that every strike shapes both the body and the mind, that through stillness and repetition, the mind becomes less like fire and more like water, able to adapt, to reflect, to cut through illusion. Rio began to change. His movements grew quieter, more deliberate. The arrogance in his stance softened. He no longer swung the sword to impress. He swung to understand. Days stretched into months. The dojo's walls, once confining, became sacred. The wooden floor creaked like an old companion, and the master watched, not with pride, but with quiet acknowledgement, for he knew the first gate had been opened. One evening, as twilight poured through the paper windows, the master approached. Rio knelt, sweat dripping from his brow. "Sensei," he said, "I feel slower, not faster." The master nodded. "Good. You are beginning to feel the weight of truth. Only when the body slows does the spirit begin to move." Rio's eyes lowered. He felt a strange peace in those words. He realized speed had always been his god, and now he was learning to let that god die. Through obedience, he was discovering freedom. Through stillness, acceleration. Through silence, sound. Each repetition stripped away a layer of his ego. Each mistake taught him patience. He learned that mastery is not a mountain you climb, but a valley you descend, where noise fades and listening begins. One night, after countless hours of the same strike, Rio stopped mid-motion. He stood there, breathing quietly, and in that pause, he felt something new: presence. It wasn't enlightenment or revelation. It was simply being here, fully. The wood beneath his feet, the air on his skin, the heartbeat between his breaths. All of it merged into one moment of total awareness. For a fleeting instant, there was no student, no master, no sword, only the movement itself, and that was enough. The master, who had been watching from the shadows, stepped forward. He placed a hand on Rio's shoulder. "You have entered Shu," he said quietly. do not hurry to leave it. The world will tempt you with shortcuts. Ignore them, because what you are building now is not just skill, it is spirit. Rio bowed deeply. He understood now that the path of the warrior was not about conquest, but about becoming worthy of the weapon you hold. That night, he sat outside the dojo, watching the lanterns flicker in the wind. He thought about his old self, the impatient boy who wanted mastery in months. And he smiled. He realized that true learning was not fast or slow. It was timeless. The repetition had changed him in ways words could not. He no longer feared slowness, because slowness had revealed its secret. It was the gate to depth. And in that depth, speed no longer mattered. Rio exhaled and whispered to himself, "Maybe this is what they mean by becoming." He closed his eyes and let the night carry him into stillness. But deep within, the next lesson was already forming. The whisper that once you master the form, you must one day break it, because even perfection can become a prison, and that is where the path of Ha begins. Chapter 3. Ha. The breaking of form. Years passed. The seasons turned like pages in a book. Cherry blossoms fell, snow returned, and Ryo's movements grew sharp as moonlight. Every strike landed with precision. Every stance held unwavering balance. He had become what most would call a master. But perfection has a way of whispering deceit. It tells you that you've arrived, that you've conquered the path, that the mountain has ended, and that whisper is where stagnation begins. Ryo's strikes, though flawless, felt empty. The rhythm was there, but the life was gone. His sword sang the same song each day, and beneath that melody, a quiet dissatisfaction began to stir. The master saw it, the stiffness, the predictability, the pride hiding behind discipline. He waited until the right morning, when the mist hung low and the dojo was still. Then he spoke. "Ryo," he said, "now, break it." Ryo looked up, confused. "Break what, sensei?" "The form." Ryo frowned. "But I've spent years perfecting it. To break it would undo everything I've built." The master turned, gazing out the open doors toward the mountain path. "The form is a cage," he said softly. "It has given you structure, but now it holds you prisoner." The words struck deep. Ryo's stomach tightened. He wanted to obey, but fear crept in. The fear of chaos, of losing control, of becoming a beginner again. But obedience had taught him trust, and so he lifted his sword. He moved without pattern, without the safety of the old rhythm. The blade wavered, his body hesitated. He stumbled. He missed. He failed. It was chaos, ugly and disordered. And for the first time in years, he felt lost. But in that confusion, there was something alive, something raw. He began to see that the breaking stage, was not destruction for its own sake. It was freedom born from discipline. To truly evolve, the warrior must outgrow his own teachings. The master spoke again. "When you followed the form protected you. Now it confines you. You must unlearn the perfection you once worshipped." The lesson was painful. Each mistake burned like a wound to his pride. But each wound was a doorway. He started to experiment. He moved differently, not from thought, but from instinct. His sword became unpredictable, like water spilling over stone, sometimes wild, sometimes graceful, sometimes still. And slowly, he began to feel something ancient stirring. Creativity. He realized that obedience had given him structure, but rebellion was giving him spirit. He remembered a saying his master once wrote on the wall: "The rigid branch breaks in the wind, the bamboo bends and survives." Rio was learning to bend. In the quiet evenings, he practiced alone. No students, no rituals, no judgment, just him, his breath, and the echo of the blade. He began to listen to the sound of imperfection, the soft vibration when the sword missed its mark, the sharp crack when it hit too soon. And in that chaos, he heard truth. Every mistake revealed how much life still pulsed beneath the technique. He started to love those moments because they reminded him that mastery wasn't stillness, it was movement. Psychologists today might call this the breaking of neural rigidity. When the brain, once fixed in patterns, is forced to adapt, it becomes alive again, flexible, creative. It's how great artists, athletes, and thinkers reinvent themselves. But the ancient Japanese didn't need science to explain it. They lived it through Ha, the path of breaking, the courage to shatter what you love, to reach what lies beyond it. Ryo's ego fought back many nights. He feared he was regressing, losing his edge. But the master reminded him, to lose form is not to lose skill. It is to discover where skill ends and spirit begins. So he persisted. He broke his rhythm deliberately. He mixed breath and movement, letting instinct guide where logic once ruled. He stopped caring about beauty and focused on truth. And truth, once unbound, is always wild. One evening, while practicing beneath the setting sun, Ryo's sword slipped. It struck the ground, sending a spark into the fading light. The sound was sharp, like the crack of thunder on dry air. He froze. Then he smiled. For the first time, he saw his mistake, not as failure, but as revelation. It was real, unscripted, alive. He looked at the blade half buried in dust and whispered, "Now I see. The sword doesn't belong to me. I belong to it." That night, he walked to his master and bowed deeply. "Sensei," he said, "I've broken the form." The old man nodded, his face calm, almost proud. "Good. Now, move beyond it." "Beyond?" Ryo asked. "Yes, when the form is gone, what remains? That is Re." The student hesitated. "Will I still be a swordsman then?" The master smiled faintly. "No, you will be the sword." In that moment, Ryo understood. Ha is the bridge between order and chaos, between the known and the infinite. It's where the warrior ceases to worship perfection and begins to worship truth. He realized that every discipline, every system, every identity must one day be dissolved, not out of rebellion, but out of reverence. Because the path of mastery is not a ladder you climb, but a circle you dissolve into. And as he stood before the master, covered in sweat, trembling with exhaustion, he felt strangely liberated. He was no longer defined by success or failure. He had fallen and risen and fallen again, until falling itself became flight. The master turned away, whispering, "Now you are no longer a student of the sword. You are a student of yourself." That night, Ryo sat by the river outside the dojo. The moon reflected on the water, a perfect circle, trembling slightly with each ripple. He realized that the reflection was never truly still. And yet, it never lost its form. It bent without breaking. It changed without vanishing. And in that trembling image, he saw himself. The boy who once worshipped speed had now fallen in love with slowness. The warrior who once sought mastery had now found wonder in imperfection. The next morning, he would wake again. He would pick up the sword, and when he moved, it would no longer be practice, it would be prayer. But this prayer would not be for strength, nor for victory, but for union, for the moment when the sword, the man, and the motion would become one. And that was the path of Re. Chapter 4. Re, the spirit beyond technique. Morning broke like gold over the mountains. Mist rolled through the valley, soft, alive, breathing. And there, at the edge of the dojo, Rio stood, still, no stance, no sword raised, just stillness, presence. He had spent years chasing mastery through motion, but now, silence itself felt like the deepest form of movement. The master watched him quietly. There were no more corrections, no more words to offer, because when a student reaches Re, the teacher's voice must disappear. Ryu no longer practiced for perfection. He practiced to remember that the sword was never about the blade. It was about the mind that wields it and the spirit that watches that mind. Each swing was slower now, deliberate, almost tender. Sometimes he would stop mid-strike, as if listening to something only he could hear, a rhythm that wasn't taught, only felt. When his sword met the air, it no longer cut. It flowed, like water returning to the sea. Years ago, he wanted to conquer skill. Now, he simply wanted to dissolve within it. He had broken the form, and now he moved beyond form, Rai. The sword was no longer a tool. It was a mirror, a reflection of his soul. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, the master approached him one final time. Ryo, he said, what is the purpose of your training? Ryo lowered his sword, his eyes calm, unblinking. To forget I was ever training. The master smiled faintly. Then, the circle is complete. The young man bowed deeply, and for the first time, he felt no difference between bowing to his master and bowing to the wind, the stones, the river. He understood now that mastery was not something to achieve. It was something to return to that childlike wonder before the world told him who to be. He remembered his first day, trembling, impatient, desperate to prove himself. Now, he felt no urgency, no hunger, just a quiet joy, the kind that comes when effort turns into grace. In the language of Zen, this is mushin, no mind, a state beyond fear and thought, where the body moves but the self is gone, where action arises without the actor. It is what modern science might call flow, but the ancients knew it as the return to the void, to be so fully present that nothing else remains. Ryo began teaching younger students now, but unlike his own early training, he did not correct them harshly. He guided them like a river guides the stone, slowly, patiently, shaping them without force. Sometimes he would say, "Do not seek mastery, seek meaning, for when your spirit becomes still, skill follows like a shadow." They didn't always understand, but in their confusion, he saw his younger self, the boy who once believed that learning faster meant living better. He smiled softly at the irony, because now, after all these years, he realized that true learning is not speed, it's depth. That to learn 10 times faster was never about time. It was about presence, about how fully you can dissolve into what you love. When night fell, Rio walked to the edge of the bamboo grove. The moon hung low, quiet, unjudging. He placed his sword before him and bowed. "I am no longer the student," he whispered, "and I am no longer the master. I am simply the path." He closed his eyes. The wind moved through the trees, and for a moment, it was as if the world itself was breathing through him. No separation, no effort, only unity. The path of Shuhari was complete, but the man who had walked it no longer existed as the same being who began. He had not become more. He had simply become less. Less of ego, less of fear, less of the noise that once drowned the silence. And in that emptiness, he discovered everything. In that final breath of stillness, the essence of the ancient system revealed itself. To learn anything, truly, deeply, you must first obey with humility, Shu, then break with courage, Ha, and finally, transcend with wisdom, Ri. That is the secret the ancients left behind, not to master faster, but to disappear deeper. Because the true warrior doesn't seek to learn more, he seeks to become less, until nothing remains, except the silence where mastery lives. Chapter 5. The Return to Silence. Years had passed. The once fiery student was now a man of quiet grace. Rio no longer wielded the sword in battle, for the greatest battles were no longer outside him. They lived softly within. He taught now, not through power, but through presence. His students came from every corner of the land, young, restless, eager to learn fast. They reminded him of himself, the boy who once thought speed was mastery, who mistook movement for progress and effort for growth. The dojo had changed little. The same wooden floors, the same faint scent of rain-soaked pine, but what filled the space now was different. A quiet energy, calm and boundless. Rio's teaching was not instruction, it was transmission. His lessons did not begin with words, they began with silence. He would watch his students move, their swings too tight, their breath too loud. He'd say nothing, only observe, until finally one would drop the sword, frustrated, trembling with the same fire he once knew too well. "Sensei," the student would plead, "why can't I learn faster?" And Rio would smile, softly, knowingly, "Because you are trying to learn what you have not yet become." The same words his master once told him. The circle complete. In time, the students learned to slow down, to listen, to breathe, to feel the air between movements. They began to sense what Ryo had once resisted. That silence is not the absence of progress, but the space in which progress is born. Some days, he would walk through the dojo as they trained, his footsteps silent on the wood, the rhythm of their breathing in sync with his own. There was no teacher, no student, only the path. And beyond the discipline of swordsmanship, Rio taught them life. When one struggled with anger, he said, "Hold your emotion as you would your blade, firmly, but without harm." When another sought perfection, he replied, "Perfection is the shadow cast by fear. Seek presence instead." Each lesson carried not philosophy, but essence, truth distilled through years of stillness. Outside, the seasons turned, cherry blossoms fell, winter winds came and went, and through every change, Ryo remained, anchored in peace. One morning, as dawn painted the dojo in pale gold, he stood before his reflection in the polished blade. For a long moment, he looked at the face staring back, the lines of age, the quiet in his eyes. He whispered, "I am no longer the student, nor the master. I am simply the path itself." And with that, he placed his sword down for the final time. No ceremony, no farewell, only silence. The master before him had once said, "When you no longer need the form, you have become the form." Now he understood. The Shuhari cycle was not a ladder to climb, but a circle, eternal and infinite. What was once a method of learning had become a way of being. Years later, villagers spoke of a quiet teacher who lived beyond the forest, a man who could calm a storm with his silence. They came seeking secrets, shortcuts to wisdom, but left realizing the truth, that no secret exists, only stillness, only presence. One of his final students, a young boy with bright eyes, asked, "Sensei, when will I become a master?" Ryo smiled faintly. "When you no longer care to be one." The boy frowned. He did not understand, but one day he would, because that is how wisdom travels. Not through words, but through time. Not through speech, but through silence. The story returns to the empty dojo, the same as it began. Only now, the echo of footsteps is gone. The sword rests upon the stand, its blade gathering dust. A monument not to battle, but to peace. Outside, the wind carries a whisper, a voice that could be Ryo's, or his master's, or perhaps the voice of life itself. The fastest path is presence. The camera lingers on the quiet dojo, the wood gleaming softly in the morning light, then fades to black. Conclusion: the way of stillness. In a world that worships speed, we have forgotten the rhythm of stillness. We scroll faster, we speak faster, we learn faster, but remember less. We chase every hack, every shortcut, believing that mastery is somewhere out there, waiting to be downloaded. But the ancients knew something we've forgotten, that true learning, the kind that transforms you, doesn't happen in the noise. It happens in the silence between effort and surrender. The warrior's path was never about the sword. It was about the space between two breaths, the calm between two strikes, the stillness between what was and what could be. To learn 10 times faster is not to rush 10 times harder. It is to listen 10 times deeper, to feel what the mind cannot analyze, to become what the ego cannot control. The greatest masters were not collectors of knowledge. They were dissolvers of self. Their genius was not speed. It was presence. Because the moment you stop trying to learn, you begin to absorb. When you stop reaching for mastery, you realize it was never running from you. It was waiting for you to slow down enough to meet it. So remember Ryo. Remember the student who sought to learn fast and found instead the wisdom of becoming slow. Let his silence remind you that the mind learns through effort, but the spirit learns through surrender. The way of Shuhari is not a method. It is a mirror, a reflection of every path worth walking, whether in art, discipline, or the quiet practice of being human. Because in the dojo of life, the fastest way forward will forever be stillness. Core, moral, the path to mastery is not about speed, but surrender. To learn faster, you must first become still enough to be taught.